You're not going to believe what can happen out in the Montana wild. Out where the pines stand so tall they scratch the belly of the sky, and the silence is so deep you can hear your own heart break. This is a story about a woman named June who was running from a ghost you couldn't see. And it's about a boy who crashed into her life, bringing a storm right to her doorstep. It starts, as these things often do, with the sound of a dog growling. The forest around Bitterroot Ridge was the kind of quiet that gets inside your ribs and presses out. For 93 days, June hadn't heard a human voice. She knew because she scratched a line for every single one of them inside an old medical book. Used to be for tracking fevers. Now she was tracking silence. Her cabin was a wreck, leaning against an old forgotten fire tower. Walls patched with canvas, roof patched with memories. Every morning was the same. Stoke the stove, haul the water, let the cold crawl into your bones. Routine was a kind of armor. It kept the ghosts at bay. On the 94th morning, the armor cracked. It was just before dawn. The world was gray and sleeping. June was outside, the air so cold it felt like breathing powdered glass. Her dog, Banner, let out a growl. It wasn't his usual squirrel in the woodpile bark. This was low, mean, the kind of sound that says death is walking nearby. June went still. Her breath plumed in the air. She waited, and then she heard it. A rustle in the tree line. Something stumbling. Something hurt. She didn't hesitate. She slipped back inside, her hand going for the old Winchester rifle propped by the door. She didn't load it. Hadn't in years. She didn't trust her own hands with that kind of power anymore. Not after what they'd done. Not after what they'd failed to do. A figure stumbled out of the trees. Barely a boy. Maybe 14. Black hair in loose, messy braids. He was wrapped in a thin blanket. His boots didn't match, and his face was a pale, ghastly white. He looked like a scarecrow some angry god had kicked into life. He didn't see her. He staggered to her woodpile, his hands shaking, and started clawing at the logs. Looking for splinters, maybe for something to eat. He was desperate. June stepped onto the porch. The cold wood groaned under her boots. "That's not yours," she said. Her voice was rough, like a rusty hinge. The boy froze. He turned his head slowly, and his eyes, they were wild, dark and rimmed with fever. He said something, a single word in a language she barely recognized. Apache. Then he collapsed, just folded into the dirt like a letter you don't want to read. It took all her strength to drag him inside. He was light as a bundle of sticks, but burned like a furnace. His shirt was stiff with old dried blood. She cut it away and found the wound. A nasty gash under his ribs. It wasn't fresh. Days old, angry, infected. She went to work, the old muscle memory kicking in. Water, whiskey to clean, pine resin to pack it. The way the army surgeons had taught her before the bodies started piling up too fast to care. All the while the boy shivered and muttered in his sleep. June didn't sleep that night. She just sat by the stove, watching this strange boy fight for his life under her only spare quilt. Banner lay beside him, a silent furry guardian, and June felt something stir inside her. A part of her she thought had died and been buried long ago. The part that cared if a person lived or died. She didn't know it yet, but by dragging that boy into her home, she hadn't just invited in a stranger, she had invited in a war. The boy's name was Talma. It took him 2 days to say it. He woke up looking at her like a cornered animal, ready to bite the hand that fed him. He barely spoke English, but he understood broth. He understood stillness. She asked him where his family was. He just stared at the wall. She asked him how he got hurt. He turned his face to the window, to the deep, dark woods. He didn't have to say it. She could see it in his eyes, the same hollowed-out look she saw in her own reflection every morning. He was alone, just like her. By the 5th day, he was strong enough to sit up. She'd catch him staring at her sack of flour like it was a pile of gold. That night she made cornbread, thick and warm. She left a piece by his cot and went outside. She didn't want him to see the softness in her eyes. Softness was a liability out here. It was on the 6th morning that the real trouble began. Banner started growling again. That same low, ugly sound. June grabbed the Winchester, and this time, she slid a shell into the chamber. The click was loud in the morning quiet. She stepped onto the porch. A man was standing at the edge of the clearing. He wasn't like the boy. This man was tall, broad, solid as an old-growth oak. He wore a heavy wool coat, and the frost steamed off his long black hair. His face was a mask carved from stone. Unreadable. Dangerous. He just stood there, watching. From inside the cabin, the boy, Talma, whispered a single word. A name she would come to fear, and then to understand. Sonny. Her heart hammered against her ribs. So, this was the brother, the family. June raised the rifle, settling the stock against her shoulder. She didn't say a word. The man didn't move. He didn't threaten. He just looked past her, his dark eyes locking onto the boy inside the cabin. Then he spoke. His voice was deep, steady, like stones rolling in a riverbed. You kept him alive. It wasn't a question. It was a judgment. June nodded, her throat tight. He was hurt. He found me. The man raised a hand, a slow, deliberate motion. You kept him alive, he repeated. I will not forget. And then, without another word, he turned and melted back into the trees. He was gone as suddenly as he'd appeared, leaving June with a loaded rifle, a boy who wasn't hers, and a cold, creeping dread that coiled in the pit of her stomach. She thought he was thanking her. She was wrong. He wasn't giving thanks. He was giving a warning. For 2 days, June lived on a knife's edge. Every snapped twig, every hoot of an owl sent a jolt through her. She kept the rifle loaded now, propped right by the door where she could grab it. She wasn't afraid the man, Sonny, would come back with violence. She was afraid of something worse. The look in his eyes wasn't anger. It was appraisal, like a wolf deciding if a sheep is worth the trouble of the shepherd. Talma the boy was quiet. He was healing, moving around the small cabin with a careful grace, as if he was afraid of taking up too much space. He'd help with chores without being asked, chopping kindling, hauling water, small gestures of thanks that felt heavier than words. At night he would draw in the ashes of the hearth, strange symbols, circles, feathers, spirals. He'd whisper to the embers in his Apache tongue, prayers maybe, or messages. One night she found him crouched by the dying fire, arranging pine cones in a specific pattern. The smoke curled up the chimney, carrying a story she couldn't understand. What are you doing? She whispered. He didn't startle. He just looked at her, his dark eyes reflecting the faint orange glow. Smoke talks, he said, his English soft and halting. He will know I am safe. He, Sonny, and sure enough, on the 4th day, he returned. He didn't sneak. He just appeared. One moment, the clearing was empty. The next, he was there, a brace of rabbits slung over his shoulder. June opened the door before he even reached it. I brought meat, he said. It was a statement, not an offer. You can clean it on the stump, she replied, her voice flat. He worked with a practiced, brutal efficiency. His hands were sure, his knife was sharp. There was no cruelty in it, just the simple, hard truth of survival. This is what it costs to live. Later, as the rabbit stew simmered over the stove, he finally came inside. He stood with his back to the wall, a silent sentinel, his eyes scanning every corner of her small world. You were a healer, he said, looking at the neat stitches on Talma's side. I was, June said. Army nurse. He held her gaze. Which side? A spark of the old defiance flared in her. The one that was bleeding. For the first time, something flickered in his stone-like expression. Not a smile. More like recognition. As if he'd found a fellow survivor in the wreckage. He stepped into the firelight. My name is Sonny. June, she replied. I know, he said, and the way he said it sent a chill down her spine. He didn't just know her name. He knew her. You were at the Red Knife crossing? Red Knife. The words hit her like a physical blow. A name for a massacre she had tried to bury for 6 long years. A day of mud and blood and the screams of children. The day her soul had cracked open. She'd walked away from the army, from her life, from everything, right after that. Let them think she was dead. In many ways, she was. How did he know? How could this man, this stranger from the wilderness, know her deepest, darkest secret? I don't know what you're talking about, she lied, her voice paper-thin. Sonny's eyes narrowed. He took another step closer, his presence filling the tiny cabin, sucking all the air out. Don't you? He said, his voice dangerously low. My brother wasn't just lost in these woods, June. He was tracking you. The stew bubbled on the stove, forgotten. Talma sat frozen on his cot. The world had shrunk to the space between June and this man. Why? She breathed. Sonny reached into his coat. He didn't pull out a knife. He didn't pull out a gun. He pulled out a small, tattered piece of canvas. An army medic's sash. Her sash. Stained dark with old blood. Because you have something that belongs to my people, he said, his voice laced with an ancient grief. Something you took from a dying man at Red Knife. And because you took it, everyone else died. The floor fell out from under June's world. She wasn't a rescuer. She wasn't a healer. In his eyes, she was a monster, a thief responsible for the slaughter of his family. And he hadn't come to thank her for saving his brother. He had come to collect the debt. June's mind reeled, scrambling back through the fog of memory, through the blood and the chaos of the Red Knife crossing. A dying soldier. Yes, she remembered. A young private, his eyes wide with terror, pressing something into her hand as he bled out in the mud. A small carved piece of stone. It was smooth, cool to the touch. She'd thought it was a good luck charm, a trinket from home. In the panic, she'd stuffed it in her pocket and forgotten all about it. Until now. It was just a rock, she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. A soldier's charm. It was a peace token? Sonny's voice cut through her like a razor. A message from the colonel to our chief. An offering of truce. It was meant to stop the fighting before it began. But it never arrived. He let the silence hang in the air, thick and heavy with accusation. Because you took it. The horror of it washed over her. She hadn't just failed to save a life that day. She had unwittingly damned an entire village. The ghosts she'd been running from suddenly had names, faces, and they were all his. I didn't know, she said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. It doesn't matter, Sonny replied, his face a mask of cold fury. The debt is owed. Give it to me. She looked around the tiny cabin, her sanctuary now a prison. She had nothing. She'd sold everything of value years ago. Her meager supplies wouldn't last a month. I don't have it anymore, she confessed, her heart sinking. I must have lost it. It was years ago. Sonny's eyes turned to flint. Liar! He took a menacing step forward, and Talma, the boy she'd saved, scrambled to his feet, putting himself between them. She speaks truth, Talma said, his voice high but steady. She saved me. Sonny looked at his younger brother, a flicker of conflict in his eyes. He was torn between his duty to his people and the life of his kin. But before he could make a move, another voice sliced through the tension, a voice from the doorway. Well, well, looks like I stumbled into a regular family reunion. They all spun around. A man stood there leaning against the doorframe as if he owned the place. He was thin and pale with a greasy smile that didn't reach his cold, dead eyes. He wore a dusty coat and carried a rifle with a casual, terrifying ease. June knew him. The blood drained from her face. It was Sergeant Cal Everett, the man who whistled hymns while the surgeons sawed off limbs. The man whose cruelty at Red Knife had been a special, quiet kind. The last person on earth she ever wanted to see again. Everett, she breathed. His smile widened. In the flesh, Nurse Langley, or should I say, the ghost of Bitterroot Ridge. His gaze flicked from June to Sonny, then to the precious artifact still clutched in Sonny's hand. He hadn't just come for her. He hadn't just come for Sonny. His eyes lit up with a greedy, feverish light. I believe you have something of mine, he said to Sonny, his voice dripping with false civility. Funny little rock, isn't it? Turns out it's worth more than a rumor. A whole lot more. It all clicked into place in June's mind, a horrifying puzzle snapping together. Everett hadn't been following orders at Red Knife. He'd known about the peace token. He'd orchestrated the whole massacre to get his hands on it. He was the reason the truce failed. He was the monster. and he had just followed the trail right to her door. The cabin, once a shelter, had become a tinderbox, and Cal Everett had just walked in holding a lit match. "That trinket doesn't belong to you, Everett," June said, finding her voice, a core of steel forming in her gut. Everett just chuckled, a dry rattling sound. "Possession is 9/10 of the law, nurse, and out here, my rifle is the law." He took a slow step into the room. Behind him, in the clearing, June could see the shapes of more men, at least two others, rifles ready. They were surrounded. "You're a long way from the army, Sergeant," Sonny said, his voice a low growl. He subtly shifted his weight, positioning himself to defend both June and Talma. The lines had been redrawn in an instant. They were no longer accuser and accused. They were allies against a common evil. "The army pays in metals," Everett sneered. "This little rock pays in gold. A lot of it. Now hand it over, Apache, and maybe I'll let the lady live. For old time's sake." He was lying. June could see it in his eyes. He wouldn't leave any witnesses. He'd burn this cabin to the ground, with all of them inside, and whistle a hymn while he did it. They were trapped, outnumbered and outgunned. Then Talma did something unexpected. The boy, who had been silent and scared, suddenly yelled in his native tongue. It wasn't a cry of fear. It was a command, a war cry. And outside, the forest erupted. A piercing shriek echoed through the trees, and one of Everett's men screamed, stumbling back with an arrow protruding from his shoulder. It wasn't from Sonny. It was from the trees, from nowhere. Everett spun around, his face a mask of shock and rage. "What the hell?" Another arrow whistled past his head, embedding itself in the doorframe inches from his face. It was a warning shot. Sonny seized the moment. He wasn't just a hunter. He was a warrior. He moved with a speed that was terrifying, a blur of motion. He launched himself at Everett, not with a rifle, but with the bone-handled knife from his belt. The small cabin exploded into a whirlwind of violence. June reacted on pure instinct. She shoved Talma towards the back of the cabin, towards the small shuttered window. "Get out! Run!" she yelled. She grabbed the heavy iron skillet from the stove. It wasn't a gun, but it was weight and fury in her hands. She swung it with all her might at the other man, trying to push his way inside, connecting with the side of his head with a sickening crack. He went down in a heap. The fight between Sonny and Everett was brutal and close. They crashed against the table, sending plates and mugs scattering. Everett was bigger, but Sonny was faster, more fluid. His knife darted in, seeking purchase, while Everett tried to bring the butt of his rifle around to crush Sonny's skull. June saw her chance. Everett was off balance. She lunged, grabbing the hot stew pot from the stove and flinging its contents straight into his face. He howled, a sound of pure agony, stumbling back, clawing at his scalded skin. His grip on his rifle loosened for just a second. It was all Sonny needed. He drove his knife into Everett's thigh, a deep, disabling wound. Everett screamed again, his leg buckling beneath him. "Fall back!" he shrieked to his remaining man outside. "Fall back!" The man didn't need telling twice. He was already dragging his wounded companion back towards the horses, firing blindly into the trees. Everett, clutching his leg, hobbled out the door, his face a grotesque mask of hatred. "This isn't over, Langley," he spat, blood and stew dripping from his chin. "You hear me? I'll be back, and I'll burn this whole damn mountain down around you." Then he was gone, disappearing into the chaos. Silence descended on the cabin, broken only by the ragged sound of their breathing. The room was a wreck. Smashed furniture, spilled food, the coppery smell of blood. June looked at Sonny, who was breathing heavily, his knife still dripping. He had a nasty cut on his arm, bleeding freely. But he was alive. They were all alive. "Who was that?" June asked, her voice shaking. "In the trees." Sonny shook his head, a look of grim confusion on his face. "I don't know. My people are not here." Then who had saved them? Who had fired those arrows with such deadly precision? As if in answer, a figure emerged from the tree line. It wasn't a warrior. It wasn't a man. It was an old woman, her face a road map of wrinkles, her hair gray and braided with bone beads. She held a simple wooden bow in one hand, and she was looking right at Sonny, Talma ran to her, speaking in rapid Apache. The old woman placed a hand on his head, but her eyes never left Sonny. Sonny stared at her, his face pale with a dawning, terrible realization. Nolly, he whispered. It was a name, but it sounded like a curse. You were followed, Sonny, the old woman said, her English clear and sharp. You led them right to us. The hidden archer wasn't a stranger. She was family. And Sonny, in his quest for vengeance against June, hadn't just endangered himself. He had exposed the location of a hidden sanctuary. He had led the wolf right to the last of his flock. And Everett now knew there was something more valuable than a silver map hidden in these mountains. There were people, witnesses, survivors, and he would be back to erase them all. The weight of Sonny's failure settled over him like a shroud. He looked from the old woman, Nolly, to June, his face etched with a shame so deep it was painful to watch. He had been so sure, so righteous in his anger. Now that same anger had put everyone he loved in mortal danger. I will fix this, he said, his voice low and tight. Nolly just shook her head, a gesture of profound disappointment. There is no fixing this, boy. There is only surviving it. The white man knows we are here now. He will not stop. She turned her sharp, assessing gaze on June. You are the nurse, the firekeeper. June frowned. The what? The one who keeps the flame alive when all that is left is ash, Nolly said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. She gestured to the healing wound on Talma's side. You saved the bloodline. You tended the coals. She looked around the wrecked cabin, at the mess in the blood. And you fight like a cornered badger. Good. June felt a strange sense of vertigo. In the space of an hour, she had gone from a thief to an ally to a firekeeper. This world of symbols and debts was spinning too fast. Nolly's focus was practical, sharp. He will be back, with more men. We must prepare. She looked at Sonny's bleeding arm. And first, we stop the bleeding. June snapped back into medic mode. Inside, she ordered, her voice regaining its old authority. Both of you. As she cleaned and stitched Sonny's wound, the story came out in pieces. Nolly was their grandmother, the matriarch of the small band of survivors from Red Knife. They had found a hidden valley, a sanctuary deep in the Bitterroot Range, a place to heal and hide. Talma, desperate to help his people, had heard whispers in a nearby town about a bounty on a nurse from Red Knife and a missing artifact. He thought if he could find the artifact, he could trade it for supplies, for safety. He didn't know its true meaning. He was just a boy, trying to be a man. He has a brave heart, but a foolish head, Nolly said, watching June's efficient work. Talma had been captured by Everett's men, who tortured him for information. They wanted to know where the rest of his people were. He escaped, half dead, and ran. He wasn't tracking June to lead Sonny to her. He was running to the one person he knew Everett was also looking for, hoping to find an ally, a refuge. He had stumbled into her clearing by sheer desperate luck. The artifact, the peace token, was now a bigger liability than ever. It wasn't a map to silver. That was a lie Everett had concocted to recruit his men. Nolly revealed its true purpose. It was etched with symbols, a celestial map that, when aligned with the winter stars, pointed the way to their hidden valley. It was the key to their home, and Everett had seen it. He might not know how to read it, but he was smart. He would figure it out. We cannot let him have it, Sonny said, his jaw tight with pain and resolve. He will not have it, June said, tying off the last stitch. She looked at the small stone artifact, which Nolly had placed on the table. It seemed so insignificant, yet it held the fate of a people. We have to destroy it. Nolly and Sonny both looked at her in horror. No, Sonny exclaimed. It is the last piece of our history, a record of the promise that was broken. We cannot destroy it. It is a guidepost that leads our enemies to our door, June countered, her voice firm. It's a liability, a tombstone waiting to be carved. The firekeeper is right, Nolly said softly, her words surprising them both. She looked at the artifact with a deep sadness. Its story has been told. Now it is a danger. Some memories are too heavy to carry. The decision was made. But how do you destroy something that is both a sacred relic and a deadly map? They couldn't just throw it in the river. Everett's men could find it. They couldn't bury it. They might be watched. The fire, June said, her gaze drawn to the stove. The fire must consume it. It felt like a ritual. Nolly held the stone, whispering words in her native tongue, a prayer of farewell. Sonny stood beside her, his face a stoic mask hiding a world of pain. Talma watched, his young face old with understanding. June stoked the fire, making it roar, the heat so intense it felt like it could melt steel. Nolly placed the stone inside the belly of the stove. They watched, waiting for it to crack, to melt, to turn to dust. But nothing happened. The stone sat in the heart of the inferno, glowing a dull red, but it remained whole. The symbols on its surface seemed to mock them, as if they were carved by the gods themselves. It wouldn't burn. A new cold dread filled the room. The map was indestructible. They couldn't get rid of it. And outside the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in bloody streaks of red and orange. The clock was ticking. Everett was out there, nursing his wound and his rage. He would be back. If we can't destroy it, Sonny said, his voice grim, we must use it. As bait. The plan was desperate, born from the edge of a cliff. They couldn't stay in the cabin. It was a death trap. They couldn't run to the hidden valley. Everett would surely be watching the trail. They had to draw him somewhere else. Somewhere they could choose the ground. Somewhere they could make a stand. The old fire tower. It was rickety, half-rotten, but it offered a vantage point. It was defensible. More importantly, it was visible for miles. A perfect place to light a signal fire. A perfect place to set a trap. They worked through the twilight, a silent, efficient team. Sonny, despite his wound, moved with a hunter's purpose, setting snares and deadfalls on the path leading up to the tower. Nolly, with her knowledge of herbs and poisons, coated arrow tips with a paralyzing toxin derived from nightshade. Not lethal, but effective. Talma, small and quick, became their scout, moving like a ghost through the underbrush, watching for any sign of Everett's return. June, meanwhile, became an architect of a different kind. She rummaged through her old medical supplies, her mind racing back to battlefield triage. She found bottles of alcohol, oil, tightly packed gauze, and sulfur-based powders for treating infections. Separately, they were tools of healing. Combined, they were something else entirely. She was building a weapon not of destruction, but of chaos. As night fell, a thick fog rolled in, blanketing the ridge in a ghostly white shroud. It was both a blessing and a curse. It would hide their movements, but it would also hide the enemies. They gathered at the base of the tower, a small, determined band against a coming storm. The indestructible artifact was now in June's pocket, its weight a constant, heavy reminder of the stakes. "He will come soon," Talma whispered, appearing silently at June's side. "I saw their fire, a half-mile down the slope. They are gathering." More men. Of course there were more men. Everett would have gone back to the nearest town and promised a share of the silver to every desperate soul with a gun. Nolly handed June a bow and a quiver of her poisoned arrows. "You were an army nurse," she said. "You know anatomy. You know where to aim to stop a man, not kill him." It was a test and a sign of trust. June took the bow. The wood felt foreign in her hands, but the logic was familiar. A healer knows exactly how to wound. They climbed the rickety stairs of the fire tower, the old wood groaning in protest. At the top, in the small enclosed platform, the fog was so thick it was like being inside a cloud. They couldn't see the ground. "Now," Sonny said. June took a deep breath and went to work. She poured the alcohol and oil onto a pile of rags in the center of the platform. Then she lit it. The fire didn't roar. It sputtered, the wet fog trying to smother it. But it held, a beacon of defiant light in the oppressive gray. A signal. "Here we are. Come and get us." They waited. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the crackle of the fire and the drip of condensation from the wooden roof. Every nerve in June's body was screaming. It felt like the moments before an ambush, the air thick with unspoken violence. Then a sound, a single, sharp crack. Not a gunshot, a twig snapping, directly below them. They had bypassed Sonny's traps. They were already here. A voice cut through the fog, chilling June to the bone. It was Everett. He sounded like he was standing right next to them. "Nice fire, Langley. Real cozy." The voice was followed by a low, mocking chuckle. "You know, I've been thinking, that rock isn't a map to silver, is it? It's a map to people. To your people," he called out to Sonny. "And you led me right to them. Thanks for that." He was toying with them, using the fog to his advantage, his voice echoing, disembodied. "But I don't need the rock anymore," Everett continued, his voice seeming to come from another direction now, "because I have something better, a new map." There was a scuffling sound from below, and then a cry of pain, a cry June recognized. Talma. They had him. While they were preparing the tower, one of Everett's men must have circled around, snatching the boy while he was scouting. The bait had been taken, but the trap had sprung on them. "Let him go, Everett!" June screamed into the fog, her voice ragged with fury. "Oh, I will," came the reply, closer now. "As soon as your friend here tells me how to get to his little hidden paradise. Or you could just throw down the magic rock. Your choice. The boy or the stone." It was an impossible choice. Give him the key to the sanctuary, or sacrifice the boy. Sonny gripped his knife, his knuckles white. He looked at Nolly, his face a mask of agony. Nolly's expression was unreadable, carved from ancient sorrow. But June was thinking. Her mind was racing, not as a warrior, but as a medic. Fog, fire, alcohol, sulfur. An idea sparked, a desperate, insane gamble, a healer's trick. She grabbed her medical bag, her hands moving with a surgeon's precision. "Keep him talking," she hissed to Sonny. She worked furiously, crushing the sulfur powder, mixing it with a dry accelerant she'd made from tree sap and dust. It was a variation of a signal flare recipe designed to create smoke and light, but in this thick, wet fog, it would do something else. "Time's up!" Everett's voice boomed from the base of the tower. "What's it gonna be?" "Wait!" June called out. She stood up, holding the artifact in one hand, visible in the firelight. "You want it? Here it is." She held it out over the railing, as if to drop it. All eyes, seen and unseen, would be on that stone. With her other hand, hidden in the shadows, she tossed her makeshift chemical packet into the heart of the fire. For a second, nothing happened. The fire just hissed, and then the world exploded. It wasn't a fireball. It was something stranger, more terrifying. The sulfur compound reacted with the water particles in the fog, creating an instantaneous, massive chemical reaction. The fire didn't just flare up. It expanded, creating a blinding, searing white flash that turned the entire mountaintop into daylight for a split second. It was followed by a deafening bang, a concussive wave of sound that shook the very foundations of the tower. And then, the smoke. Thick, choking, yellow-green smoke, billowing outwards in every direction, a foul-smelling cloud that burned the eyes and stole the breath. Chaos erupted below. Men screamed, blinded and disoriented. Gunshots went off randomly, their owners unable to see what they were shooting at. The fog had become their enemy, a toxic, blinding prison. It was the diversion she needed. "Now!" June yelled. Sonny didn't need to be told. He vaulted over the railing, landing silently on the ground below, a vengeful spirit emerging from the poison cloud. Nolly was right behind him, her bow drawn. June didn't wait. She grabbed a burning piece of wood from the fire, a makeshift torch, and scrambled down the ladder. The smoke was acrid, but she held her breath, her eyes streaming. On the ground it was a scene from hell. Figures stumbled through the yellow murk, coughing and gagging. She saw Sonny engage one man, a swift, brutal takedown. She saw Nolly send a poisoned arrow into the leg of another, who crumpled to the ground, twitching. June's target was Everett. She followed the sound of his cursing, finding him trying to drag Talma away from the chaos. "Langley!" he roared when he saw her, raising his pistol. She didn't hesitate. She threw the burning torch directly at his face. He flinched, batting it away, but it was the opening she needed. She closed the distance, not with a weapon, but with her body. She slammed her shoulder into his wounded leg. He screamed in agony, his leg giving way, and he went down hard. Talma scrambled away from him, running towards the sound of Nolly's voice. Everett tried to raise his pistol again, his face a snarl of pure hate. "You witch!" June didn't give him the chance. She stomped down hard on his wrist. There was a sickening crunch of bone, and the gun clattered to the ground. She kicked it away into the smoke. He was disarmed, wounded, beaten. It was over. The smoke began to clear, revealing the aftermath. Two of Everett's men lay on the ground, groaning, the paralysis from Nolly's arrows setting in. The others had fled, crashing through the woods like panicked deer. Sonny stood over Everett, his knife at the man's throat. His eyes were burning with a righteous fury. This was it. The moment of vengeance for his people, for the massacre at Red Knife. "Do it," Everett rasped, a defiant smirk on his lips. "Prove you're the savage I always said you were." June looked at Sonny's face, at the years of pain and rage converging on the tip of that blade, and she knew this was the most important moment of all. Killing Everett wouldn't heal anything. It would just plant a new seed of poison. "Sonny, no," she said, her voice quiet but firm. She stepped forward and placed her hand on his arm. It was trembling with tension. "Don't." He looked at her, his dark eyes filled with a storm of conflict. "He doesn't deserve to live," Sonny growled. "No," June agreed. "He doesn't. But you deserve to. Vengeance is a fire that burns the one who holds it. You told me my debt was paid when I saved Talma. Let this be yours. Let it go." She reached down and picked up the artifact from where Everett had dropped it. She held it out to Sonny. "Your story isn't about how it ends for him," she said softly. "It's about how it begins again for you, for your people." For a long moment, the world held its breath. The only sound was Everett's ragged breathing and the distant crackle of the dying fire. Then slowly, Sonny lowered the knife. He took a deep, shuddering breath, and the tension seemed to flow out of him, leaving him looking weary but whole. He had chosen life over death. He had chosen the future over the past. He took the artifact from her hand. His fire was not out. It had been tempered. Nolly and Talma emerged from the clearing. Talma ran to Sonny, and for the first time, Sonny embraced his younger brother, a fierce, protective hug that spoke volumes. They tied Everett and his wounded men up. They would be left for the law in the nearest town, with a story that would be hard to deny. The bounty hunter had become the bounty. As the first hints of dawn broke through the trees, casting long, hopeful shadows, the four of them stood on the ridge, looking out at the world. They were bruised, exhausted, but they were victorious. Nolly came and stood beside June. "You are a firekeeper, June Langley," she said, her voice filled with a quiet respect. "You saved more than the bloodline tonight. You saved the soul." June looked at Sonny, who gave her a single, slow nod, a gesture of gratitude that was deeper than any words. She looked at Talma, who gave her a small, shy smile. She looked at the indestructible stone in Sonny's hand. It was no longer a map to a hidden place. It was a testament to a bond forged in chaos and fire. The silence on Bitterroot Ridge had been broken, but what had replaced it was not noise. It was family. Spring came slow to the Bitterroot Range that year, but it did come. The snow melted, the creek began to talk again, and small, stubborn flowers pushed their way through the hard soil. They didn't go to the hidden valley, not yet. Nolly said the valley was a place for peace, and they had earned a warrior's rest first. So they stayed at the cabin, June's cabin, but it wasn't just hers anymore. It became a home. They rebuilt the porch. Sonny, his arm now healed, taught Talma how to split logs with a single, clean stroke. Talma, in turn, showed June which wild herbs were good for seasoning stew and which ones could be used to make a deep blue dye. Nolly seemed to oversee it all with a quiet, knowing wisdom, humming old songs as she worked. June stopped marking the days of silence in her ledger. Instead, she started writing down recipes, sketching the patterns of bird wings, pressing flowers between the pages. The book was no longer a record of loss. It was becoming a record of life. One evening, as they sat around the fire, Sonny took out his knife. He wasn't cleaning it. He began to carve a small piece of fallen antler. He worked for hours, the scrape of his knife a soothing rhythm in the quiet. When he was done, he held it out to June. It was a small, intricately carved flame, smooth and warm to the touch. "A firekeeper must have a token," he said, his voice soft. June took it. She didn't have the words to thank him, so she just nodded, her throat thick with emotion. She found an old leather cord and tied it around her neck. It felt heavier than any metal. The world outside the ridge continued on, but for them, this small patch of land was the whole world. They were not hiding. They were building. They weren't bound by blood, but they were family, a strange, scarred, and fiercely loyal family. One afternoon, Talma came running back from the creek, his eyes wide. "A rider is coming!" They all tensed. Sonny grabbed his rifle. June moved to the doorway. The piece was so new, so fragile, they were terrified it would break. But the rider wasn't a threat. It was an old trapper named Mitchum, half-deaf and smelling of pine smoke. He'd gotten lost and was looking for the trail to town. June invited him in. She gave him hot coffee and a thick slice of cornbread. Nolly gave him a salve for the rash on his hands. He didn't ask who they were or what their story was. He just saw kindness and accepted it. Before he left, Sonny gave him directions, and Talma gave him a small, carved wooden bird for his granddaughter. As they watched him ride away, June felt something shift inside her. The fear was finally starting to recede. "You think more will come?" she asked Sonny. He looked at the cabin, at the new porch, at the smoke curling from the chimney. "Maybe," he said. And for the first time since she'd met him, a true, genuine smile touched his lips. "We should build a bigger table." And that's what they did. They never wrote their story down, not in a way anyone else would understand. It lived in the sturdy walls of the expanded cabin. It lived in the taste of the bread June baked in her new clay oven. It lived in the laughter of a boy who had found his voice again. It lived in the quiet strength of a warrior who had learned that true honor is in building, not breaking. It lived in the heart of a woman who had run to the loneliest place on earth to escape her ghosts, only to find that she had to build a home to finally silence them. The fire on Bitterroot Ridge was no longer a lonely flame against the dark. It was a beacon, warm, bright, and it remembered everything. If this story touched your heart and reminded you that family is something you build, not just something you're born into, I'd be truly grateful if you'd hit that like button. And if you want to hear more stories about the moments that change us forever, make sure you subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell. You never know what you'll find out here in the wild. Thanks for listening.